Tonight on Greater Boston, from the Boston Public Library, constitutional scholar, Harvard's Laurence Tribe, and former federal judge Nancy Gertner, both members of President Biden's Supreme Court Commission, will join me with more on the broader implications of its recent landmark decisions, the future of the court itself. But first, the sixth day of January 6 hearings centered on Cassidy Hutchinson, the former principal aide to Trump's final chief of staff, Mark Meadows, who, in a combination of pre-taped and live testimony, walked the committee through what she saw in her front row seat to the events of January 6th, starting with what Donald Trump and insurrection advisors Rudy Giuliani and Hutchinson's boss Mark Meadows knew of advanced intel about potential violence days before rioters stormed the Capitol.
I remember looking at him saying, "Rudy, could you explain what's happening on the 6th?" He had responded something to the effect of, "We're going to the Capitol. It's going to be great. The president's going to be there. He's going to look powerful." I remember leaning against the doorway and saying, "I just had an interesting conversation with Rudy, Mark. It sounds like we're going to go to the Capitol." He didn't look up from his phone and said something to the effect of, "There's a lot going on, Cass, but I don't know, things might get real bad on January 6th.
But not only did Team Trump do nothing to quell what they saw coming on the 6th, Hutchinson told the committee that when heavily armed protesters showed up to the president's rally that morning, some with pistols, others with AR-15s, Trump demanded the Secret Service let them pass the security checkpoints, which Hutchinson refers to as mags, and allow them into the crowd right in front of him.
When we were in the offstage announce area tent behind the stage, he was very concerned about the shot, meaning the photograph that we would get, because the rally space wasn't full. He wanted it full, and he was angry that we weren't letting people through the mags with weapons, what the Secret Service deems as weapons and our weapons. I overheard the president say something to the effect of, I don't effing care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Take the effing mags away. Let them in. Let my people in. They can march to the Capitol after the rally's over. They can march from the ellipse. Take the effing mags away. Then they can march to the Capitol.
A short time later, as we know, Trump went on to deliver this message to those very same protesters.
And I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down. We're going to walk down anyone you want, but I think right here we're going to walk down to the Capitol.
And we also learned today Trump did try to go with him. He tried so hard that he got physical with his head of security, Bobby Engel.
The president said something to the effect of, "I'm the effing president, take me up to the Capitol now." To which Bobby responded, "Sir, we have to go back to the West Wing." The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel. Mr. Engel grabbed his arm, said, "Sir, you need to take your hand off the steering wheel. We're going back to the West Wing. We're not going to the Capitol." Mr. Trump then used his free hand to lunge towards Bobby Engel. And when Mr. Renato had recounted this story to me, he had motioned towards his clavicles.
When they finally got back to the White House, Hutchinson testified that she overheard Trump first, then Mark Meadows and White House counsel Pat Cipollone discussing how the rioters were getting increasingly agitated, including calls for violence against the vice president.
In the background, I had heard conversations in the Oval dining room at that point talking about the hang Mike Pence chants. I remember Pat saying something to the effect of, "Mark, we need to do something more. They're literally calling for the vice president to be effing hung." And Mark had responded something to the effect of, "You heard him, Pat. He thinks Mike deserves it. He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong."
He thought he deserved it, which would explain why Trump pushed back on suggestions that he intervene before finally posting this infamous message several hours and countless warnings into the riot.
We have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special.
So special that after his team fought tooth and nail to get him to put out another video the following day, which condemned the actions of the insurrectionists, Trump took basically out all the language condemning their actions.
When he was convinced to put out a video on the 7th, I understand that he had a lot of opinions about what the context of that announcement were to entail. I had original drafts of the speech where there were several lines that didn't make it in there about prosecuting the rioters or calling them violent. He didn't want that in there. He wanted to put in there that he wanted to potentially pardon them.
And pardons were apparently on the minds of many, on top of the Congress people we learned about just the other day.
Did Rudy Giuliani ever suggest that he was interested in receiving a presidential pardon related to January 6th?
He did.
Ms. Hutchinson, did White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows ever indicate that he was interested in receiving a presidential pardon related to January 6th?
Mr. Meadows did seek that pardon. Yes, ma'am.
Trump no longer has pardon power for his supporters, his aides, and certainly himself. He instead took to his platform Truth Social during the hearing today to call Hutchinson a phony and rebut many of her claims, including that he said Pence deserved to be hanged and the whole grabbing the limo steering wheel story. Of course, if he said it on Truth Social, it must be true. Joined now by Nancy Gertner, retired federal judge, senior lecturer at Harvard Law School, and Harvard Law professor emeritus Laurence Tribe, whose students have included Barack Obama, Senator Ted Cruz, no one's perfect, Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts, Justice Elena Kagan, members of the January 6th Committee, and possibly of most relevance, U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland. It's good to see you both. Thanks so much for being here.
Good to see you.
Good to be here. I want to say that I was never one of his students.
Nor was I. You know, Larry Tribe, you tweeted this morning.
You could have canceled 3 or 4 Ted Cruz's.
You tweeted this morning, Larry Tribe, let's not expect a courageous young woman to deliver the moon. Rising the bar too high will lead to inevitable disappointment. I was never disappointed in 2+ hours. How about you?
No, I was quite stunned. I was staggered. I was thinking, what is it like to be shocked but not surprised? That's the feeling I had. I mean, for the president to grab at the throat of the head of his Secret Service detail in order to accompany an armed mob to the Capitol, armed because he had insisted that the magnetometers be removed. Any doubt that he was involved in inciting this insurrection, aiding and abetting it, as well as being quite deeply involved in the whole plot from the beginning, is now diminished to the point where it's not even a reasonable doubt.
Is it for you, Nancy Gertner? He knew to expect violence. He knew they were armed. His counsel, his lead counsel, talked about immense kinds of illegality. Does this establish, I guess, beyond a reasonable doubt, the criminality of the president if Hutchinson's testimony is to be believed?
Yes, I mean, Hutchinson, for sure, Hutchinson's testimony has to be supported. A lot of it, as I heard someone say X, it has to be supported. But more important than that, Jim, not only with respect to the insurrection, the committee is doing something which you see prosecutors do in drug cases. And you see them doing it in the January 6th prosecutions. You start at the bottom and then you go up. If it's the case that Clark, Eastman, Giuliani, and now Meadows are all part of the conspiracy to obstruct not only January 6th, but to obstruct the election, to undermine the election, I don't see how they can be conspirators without Trump also a conspirator, because he was involved in what they were doing.
You know, before I get your thoughts on that, Larry Tribe, for those that don't know, Jeffrey Clark was the environmental lawyer in the Department of Justice who Trump wanted to put in the top job, and John Eastman was obviously his lead insurrection lawyer. Larry Tribe, do you reach the same conclusion that Judge Gertner does?
I do, although I do want to say I don't think of Jeffrey Clark as an environmental lawyer. I think he was an anti-environmental lawyer.
Probably so, yes.
The guys doing the oil spills. I don't want to give a bad name to environmental lawyers, but I reached the same conclusion.
Does the fact that Clark's home, this was on the same day last week, was searched, Eastman's phone seized, this is for you, Larry, does that give you some indication where your former student, the Attorney General, is going? Because there's been a lot of criticism, including from you, about his apparent inactivity on a grand jury front.
Well, I ceased that criticism several weeks ago, maybe a month ago, when it became clear from some of the other indictments of the heads of the Oath Keepers and of the Proud Boys that he was moving up that chain that Nancy describes, looking at not only the people sort of on the ground level, but those who were coming together to plot the attack on the Capitol. And because the Department of Justice was bringing those indictments, I was beginning to feel that I had been too impatient.
You know, Nancy Gertner, before we went on the air, you said you don't like what does it mean question. So let me ask you a what does it mean question. What does it mean that that Ms. Hutchinson said today that both Giuliani and Mark Meadows were interested in pardons relative to January 6th? What inference should we draw from that?
The inference is that they knew that either they knew that they had committed a crime for which the only way out was a pardon, or they thought that they might be. I mean, I do think it's a range of things. It's I knew I committed a crime, or I might be prosecuted for a crime. I think in context, it means I knew I committed a crime, because there were so many lawyers in that room saying that what they were doing was wrong, that I think the fair inference is that they knew they committed a crime. You know, I mean, it is a stunning, it's just a stunning sort of story here, that Trump knows he loses the election, know that the false elector plot was wrong, knows that armed people are going to go to the Capitol, and in fact that he shouldn't go because it would be illegal to do what he's contemplating, knows all of that, and had the pardon power to basically exonerate the people who were the co-conspirators. In one sense, I feel lucky that he didn't pardon them. I mean, that's extraordinary. You know, but I feel relieved that he didn't pardon them.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I'm saying I think, you know, when you think about the impunity that they felt, because they felt that Trump could pardon them, that's really the definition of a totalitarian state. I can do whatever is necessary to set aside this election because the big guy is going to pardon me.
You know, if we can step back from the legal issues or illegal issues just for a second. I spoke to a bunch of friends and associates after the hearing concluded, asked what was their major takeaway, including some lawyers. One's major takeaway was the throwing of the plate against the wall with the ketchup dripping down in the Oval dining room. Another was the grabbing of the clavicle of the Secret Service guy. My major takeaway is I'm watching this 25-year-old woman who seemed like quite a patriot, and juxtapose, and with the courage she's showing apparently with some threats to her well-being, and juxtaposing that with a former national security advisor to the president, the once felonious until pardoned General Michael Flynn, taking the fifth when he's asked if he believes in a peaceful transition of power. Larry Tribe, what will stay with you most from day 6 of the hearing?
That very last example was one of the most dramatic. When Mike Flynn said that it might incriminate him criminally to say under oath that he believed in the transition of power peacefully, because he doesn't. He's made clear that he and a number of these other autocrats believe that democracy is simply window dressing. They really do not believe in the peaceful transition of power. And that comes to the very heart of what we are learning. A lot of people say that the difficulty of prosecuting Trump might be showing that he had the requisite intent, because being such an egomaniac, he must have perhaps believed he really won. Well, there are two things. First of all, there's only so much, BS you can take about that. He almost certainly didn't really believe he won. But number two, actually three things. Number two, even if he believed he won, really believed he won, that's not an excuse for taking the law into his own hands. I mean, you can say, I really believe the IRS owes me $11,780, but that doesn't entitle you to break into Fort Knox to grab it on your own. And number three, even if in the end we don't succeed in indicting or prosecuting Trump for whatever reason, if we go after, and here's where I agree so much with Nancy, it's great the pardons weren't given. If all the people immediately around him end up going to jail the way that Ehrlichman and Haldeman and all of those dudes did, then in the future, whether it's Trump or someone else, an autocrat in that situation will think, I might be above the law, but I can't do it alone. And if all the people around me are going to get hammered, I may not succeed in trying this. So at least it will be good if everybody around Trump is brought down, and I hope Trump as well.
What's the moment that stayed with you, Judge Gertner, from today?
Well, I mean, one was it was really funny. I turned to my husband and I said that if you ever saw a TV movie where the president tried to take over the steering wheel of the Secret Service car, and especially an overweight, clunky president like this, and then try to strangle the Secret Service agent, you turn to one another and say, never happened. I mean, that was extraordinary. That was extraordinary. But I think when the story's written about this, her testimony was amazing because she was someone who believed that Trump was a good president and done good things. And Liz Cheney is leading the charge. And, Liz Cheney actually applauded the Dobbs decision last week. So, it's a very interesting, the notion that Trump could have gone so far that even his supporters said, this guy is crazy and a criminal.
By the way, 93% voting record with Trump. Liz Cheney. Larry Tribe, one more thing about this before we switch to the Supreme Court. A woman who looks very much like Nancy Gertner on the radio the other day quoted that old line, if you strike at a king, you must kill him, obviously vis-a-vis a potential prosecution of Donald Trump. Do you agree with that?
No, I really don't. I think it's not clear that any jury will fail to have at least one person who hides the kind of loyalty to Trump or disbelief in democracy that might lead them to render a nullifying verdict of acquit. But I think people will nonetheless, even if he is ultimately, set free because of a hung jury, it'll be like the impeachment. A lot of people said it would be terrible to impeach this president because the Senate might acquit. Well, it did acquit. But I think for the purposes of history, it's good that he was impeached. I think similarly, it would be better for Trump to be indicted and then ultimately for there to be a hung jury than for the lesson to be that you can try to bring down the government by violence and you won't even get indicted.
Nancy, you want to defend yourself for 30 seconds or no?
Well, I think what I was dealing with was the lessons of the Mueller report, right? Mueller aimed at Trump and pulled his punches, and did so because he thought the world was a different world and a much more, much more civilized world, and that others would take up the cause. After watching the January 6th hearings, and today in particular, I believe that an indictment and even a conviction of Trump, well, certainly an indictment of Trump, follows sort of naturally from this. I think that, as I said before, I think the January 6th, they were brilliant because what they've done is they've backed the DOJ into a corner here. It cannot be that these other players were culpable in the way they are and that Trump is not. So I agree with Larry now that I first of all, I think Garland has no choice but to indict Trump. And I also think that the failure to indict Trump would be very troubling.
Can we switch gears for the remaining couple of minutes? There was a Gallup poll done in terms of confidence in the Supreme Court, and this precedes the overturning of Roe, the gun decision last week. Numbers are pretty stunning. How much confidence do you have in the Supreme Court? A great deal, quite a lot, just 25%. And again, that's before the overturning of Roe. Larry Tribe, I want to ask you about that decision. I think everybody watching knows that Justice Thomas, in his concurring opinion, said this is just the beginning. I'm paraphrasing. We should look at same-sex marriage. We should look at contraception. Alito, in his majority opinion, Justice Alito said, no, this is just about abortion. The dissenters said, don't be fooled. And actually, Margaret Marshall, who wrote the same-sex marriage decision at the SJC, she was with us on the radio about a month ago after the leak, and I asked her if she thought that this could lead to an attack on Obergefell, same-sex marriage. Here's what Chief Justice Marshall had to say.
Yes, and I'll tell you why. It's the reasoning of the court. It is not what's the particular issue. It's Justice Alito's reasoning. And when he says any such right that we recognize, quote, must be deeply rooted in this nation's history and tradition and implicit in the concept of ordered liberty, all kinds of things are not deeply rooted in our nation's history and traditions.
Do you share Chief Justice Marshall's worry, Larry Tribe?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's been clear from the moment that that opinion leaked that it couldn't be contained. When Alito said, believe me, this won't go any further, that had to mean, you know, trust me, my reasoning doesn't count. I'm just exercising power. He was perhaps speaking more truth than he knew, but that's not the way his decision will be treated. And besides, he said, as long as there is potential life, this is a unique situation. Well, that surely covers at least contraception, the Griswold case. So yes, this is an open sesame on all sorts of rights that we've all taken for granted.
Larry, very briefly, you were quoted, or actually you say misquoted, by Alito in his majority opinion. Could you give us 30 seconds on how?
Yeah, I mean, he takes some lines out of my defense of Roe v. Wade in 1973, in which I said, I've got some better arguments than Justice Blackmun. So I don't think it's a perfect opinion. And a lot of other people have agreed. And he says, see, even Tribe doesn't like Roe v. Wade. Well, so what?
Nancy Gertner, do you worry about the tentacles of this decision, as we were just discussing, of vis-a-vis Chief Justice Marshall and Larry's opinion? Do you worry that it's just the beginning?
I think it's absolutely clear. I mean, both because potential life, just if you focus on that prong, potential life can go. I worry not only about birth control, but, you know, potential life, I worry, could be a rationale for the reintroduction of protective labor legislation, right? I mean, women shouldn't be in this job or that job because of its impact on their procreative capacity, but also the notion that the only thing counts in our Constitution are those things that were explicitly stated or which were deeply rooted at the time of the founding or at the time of the post-Civil War amendments. I was irrelevant in those. Women were irrelevant in those days, and Blacks were recently enslaved and essentially diminished in the subsequent years. So, I mean, that is a view. Who is it? Who was it? Some representative who said, you know, this is a victory for the white race.
Yeah.
Representative Miller says she misspoke. White life. Yeah, I'm sorry, Larry.
White life.
Yeah, I was just going to say
White
that
life.
the deep history on which Justice Alito relied included quotes from great English jurists who've supported and favored the burning of women as witches,
Right.
and sentenced them to a fiery death. That's relevant from Alito's point of view, but not the last couple hundred years. I mean, my God.
You know,
And
Larry
also
Trump, I'm sorry.
the abortion decisions. You said that at the time of the Reconstruction, abortion was restricted. Reva Siegel, a Yale law professor, has gone through some of that history and describes that those were abortion restrictions that were not, because of the belief that there's potential life. Those were restrictions, many of which were implemented for the purpose of encouraging women to be mothers.
Yeah.
It was very much sort of hinged on a patriarchal view of the world.
You know, I've told you before, I went to NYU. I couldn't get into Harvard, so I couldn't be in Larry Tribe's class. So next time you have to explain to me the absurdity of original intent, which I still can't wrap my arms around. But we only have a minute or two left. Last time you were both on was after you had co-written a piece in the Washington Post after having served together on Joe Biden's presidential commission on the Supreme Court. And Larry, starting with you briefly, if I can, you both said, and I'm paraphrasing, we went into this process leaning in the direction of term limits and leaning against expanding the court. We came out leaning in the direction of expanding the court. People like Elizabeth Warren are saying now is the time to take that seriously. Do you feel that even stronger as a result of these hearings?
I do, and I've tried to persuade the president that he at least shouldn't pour cold water on it, but he won't go that far. He keeps saying that he's against ending the filibuster and against expanding the court. As a political matter, we don't have the votes to expand the court now, but there's no good reason for the president to be deflating the energy that the possibility of court expansion helps to generate.
He's also poured cold water on the issue of a carve-out on abortion issues for the Women's
And
Health
voting rights.
Protection Act in terms of the filibuster. By the way, I meant as a result of Supreme Court decisions. Nancy Gertner, are you on the same page as you both were when you wrote that op-ed?
Absolutely. I mean, nothing has changed. And if anything, I think Larry has written about this. These decisions were a power grab. Neither the rationale of the decision nor the timing of these decisions were required. This is a group of 5. I won't put Roberts in the group just yet, who are doing what they're doing because they can, and for no other reason.
When you
which
say
in my
quickly,
opinion is not
I'm sorry.
judicial, but which in my view is political.
When you say quickly, Nancy Gertner, you won't put Roberts in that group. We all know that Roberts was hoping for more of a middle course here. The de facto Chief Justice is Clarence Thomas now, is he not?
Yes, because he's the most senior member. Yes, I think that's right. And there is, he's implementing his wish list. I mean, the gun case was throwing out decades and decades of law from, numbers of high courts and numbers of legislatures. The abortion decision is throwing out 50 years of precedent. And I've written about this, not just federal precedent situating a right to choose under the federal constitution, but similar analysis in state constitutions. And the hubris of this gang of 5 saying, we don't agree with that stuff, and much more, we can implement it tomorrow. It's, as I've said this on the radio, for me, it's the definition of a coup, a judicial coup.
We'll end on a judicial coup. Larry Tribe, Nancy Gertner, as always, really appreciate your thoughts. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. And please join us for a special Boston Public Radio live from the Boston Public Library this Thursday at 11. Boston Mayor Michelle Wu will be with us for Ask the Mayor. And then immediately after the show, stick around for Marjorie Egan, Callie Crossley, and Paris Alston as they host a community conversation about the Supreme Court's abortion ruling. That's Thursday at 2 on GBH Radio 89.7 and streaming online at youtube.com/GBH News. For now, thank you for watching, and please don't forget Ukraine.
The ruling is in.
The U.S. Supreme Court has overturned the constitutional right to an abortion.
Now, let's talk about it.
What does this mean for abortion rights in Massachusetts?
We're hosting a community conversation.
Join us Thursday starting at 2